Hello class. We're going to begin our next unit, which is on Art Spiegelman's graphic novel Mouse. And we're going to start with just some general discussion about the book. And I want us to sort of start focusing in on the animal allegory of the book, which will be our primary focus for this unit. So a little bit of background. Art Spiegelman is the author. And he actually won the Pulitzer Prize in 1992 for Mouse. And just an overview of what happens. It is his Art Spiegelman's father's story of survival during the Holocaust as a Polish Jew. So we get a sort of layered narrative telling a true story, his father's memories of what it was like to live at this time during World War II as a Jewish man in Poland, and the experiences that he had in this very volatile environment that brought him to eventually brought him to a concentration camp where he was a prisoner along with his wife Anya, Art's mother. So the story is going to use an animal allegory to depict the circumstances of World War II. So it's a very unique way to depict a historical event and a true story. So obviously this use of animals is going to be very important in our understanding of what Art Spiegelman is trying to achieve by turning his father's story into not only a comic strip, but one that depicts the survivors and victims of the Holocaust as an animal, and in fact, everybody involved as animals. So, what is he trying to say with this animal allegory? And does he achieve another level of meaning by putting animals in the place of humans? This will be our sort of central focus in our discussion of this graphic novel. I hope you enjoy it. It's one of my favorite books, so I'm hoping everybody gets at least something out of it. Our author is Art Spiegelman, and he is an American comic artist, and he pursued art and he began doing more sort of underground comics. So when I say underground comics, I don't mean like superhero, Superman or Batman, those type of superhero type of comic books. He was more into alternative comics, um, more subversive, satirical, counterculture kind of narratives and characters. Um, so he was more interested in a kind of a different kind of comic book style. And he grew up in Rego Park in New York. And his parents, as we'll learn when you're reading it, are Polish Jews, and they're both survivors of the Holocaust. His father is Vladek, and his mother is Anna or Anya. I think she's called both at different points in the story. So one would be a more um, dialect, Anya or Anja, but she's sometimes called Anya or Anna even. It's more sort of anglicized version of her name. We do learn a little bit about the family dynamics, and there is this, deep trauma that is felt in the survivors of something like the Holocaust, which again, if you go through that experience, if you survive that kind of experience, that traumatic experience of having friends and family die, and pretty much, almost everybody being somehow affected by this circumstance. Um, Going through something like that does have lasting consequences, after effects, and we see that in even a second generation survivor like Art Spiegelman. So we'll get little glimpses of how this family is affected by the tragic experiences of the Holocaust and how they are psychologically or emotionally damaged from the events. We learn in book one that Art Spiegelman has suffered in 1968. He suffered a mental breakdown, depression, and we see him struggling with depression a little bit over the course of book one and book two, especially when he's trying to sort of get over the difficulties of representing the Holocaust and his father's experience. So he'll struggle with sort of depression and feelings of guilt, and it's a takes a psychological toll on him too. Just a creator. He didn't experience the Holocaust firsthand, but as the son of two survivors, he does sort of have his own hurdles, emotional barriers to get beyond in the creation of his book. At the very beginning of the book, we do learn that Anya, Art Spiegelman's mother, had committed suicide when he was a younger man. Um, so he suffered this mental breakdown when he was in his early 20s. His mother committed suicide when he was still in his 20s. And then he, grows up, becomes an adult, without his mother. So she commits suicide. And we can kind of, once we learn about that event a little bit more deeply in book one, we can kind of start seeing some ties between Anya's mental illness and then the tragedies that they suffered during the Holocaust. Art Spiegelman has, talked about what he wanted to or hoped to achieve in writing Mouse. Um, Obviously, it's a little controversial to represent something so serious and so such a profound experience for so many people in a comic book. So this is one of the kind of things that he's doing as an author that is really adding his own little twist on a historical or a memoir. So adding this other level of illustrating his father's story, and then on top of that, turning characters into these animal figures is, a very unique way to depict a historical event, and it's something that really stood out in terms of how the Holocaust has been represented, and it was really a kind of um, cornerstone text, I guess, of Holocaust studies. So I'm going to assume that most of you do have at least a little background on the Holocaust. And if you don't, there are a lot of good documentaries available to watch. Uh, Netflix has quite a few documentaries on the Holocaust, and that would be a good way to sort of supplement your reading of this text with maybe watching one of those documentaries. But in a very superficial way, we can understand that the Holocaust is a genocide. Um, and it included not just the murder of, but the persecution, the exploitation, and the gradual prejudice escalating to the point of murder. Extermination was the goal of all of the Jewish people in Europe. And this occurred between the war lasted from 1939 to 1945, but even before that, we have the escalation of the Nazi regime under Hitler, sort of beginning in 1933 when he seized dictatorial power and opened up the first concentration camp. So Hitler and the Nazis, Hitler was a very charismatic speaker, very powerful figure. politically, and he seized control. And he had a very impactful campaign using a lot of propaganda to gain the support of Germans and others, Europeans who maybe had, um, feelings of discontent. There was a lot of poverty, and Hitler sort of uh, revamped the economic state of Germany after World War One. So he did sort of have a way of grasping on to maybe some sentiments of the people who were very discontent, and then seizing that power for his own purposes to persecute and murder who he thought were inferior peoples, including Jewish people, but there were others who were targeted to be exterminated or tortured, or who suffered under the Nazis. It wasn't just the Jewish people, but there were others who were affected. In the concentration camps, mass exterminations by gas began in 1942, and this escalated into 1944. And then the American troops, as well as the Soviets, the Russians, those were both part of the Allies, along with Great Britain and other countries who were on the Ally side, and they were against the Axis side. So Hitler, along with the Nazi Germany and Imperial Japanese army, and then under Mussolini, his dictatorship in Italy, they were the Axis. So there was the Axis and the Allies. Americans' involvement really sort of put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, of Hitler and the Nazi Party. So we'll see how the Americans also figure into the animal allegory in Art Spiegelman's novel. But yeah, I would definitely recommend learning a little bit more about some of the background. You'll learn obviously a lot of historical little details when you're reading Maus, and it actually does give a very good portrayal of what it was like, the day-to-day kind of struggles that maybe a person might face when they were in this situation. So obviously it would be different for each individual, but we do get Vladik's story, so Art's father, and his perspective, so his point of view on how or what it was like to survive. So because he's the one telling the story, it is, I guess you could say it's sort of subjective. It's his own version of the events. But I think this is a very valuable way to sort of look at the Holocaust from a very personal, intimate, subjective memoir, rather than just reading about it in a textbook or getting a kind of historical overview in a documentary even. So it's a really neat way to read about a historical event when you have that first person perspective. So our genre that we're dealing with is a graphic novel. It's a memoir. You could also call it an oral history. The sort of process by which Art Spiegelman created the graphic novel is really fascinating. So he records his father's voice, and he records his father telling these stories, and then he's going to turn these stories into his comic book. So there was this process that took, he'd record his father over like a 4-month period, and then sit down, re-listen to Vladik's stories, and then start illustrating the events, and also kind of, trying to make it into a linear, coherent narrative. So it's based on interviews, and you can really see how Art and his father, they begin the story with kind of, conflicted father and son tension. They don't really have a close relationship, but we do get to see how this process of recording his father talking with him kind of helps them grow closer together. And when you're talking about somebody's first person subjective memories, these would be called testimonies. So this is the individual's memories of what happened. It's their story. It's not an objective or absolute factual history necessarily. It is a narrative that is subjective. So it's based on somebody's memories of the events. So there is some, there's a lot of there can be some gaps in memory or inconsistencies in Vladik's narrative. But that's just the way human memory works, right? We don't remember every single detail of what happened to us last weekend even. How is he supposed to remember every single detail of what happens to him, although it is really impressive that, at his age, Vladik has such a vivid memory of everything that happened to him, and he seems to remember, so many little details of everything that happened to him. So we get a sense too that this was such a definitive, important event in his life, and it really changed him forever. In terms of the format, the structure of Mouse, you do have sort of different time periods. The framing story is what takes place between Art and his father when he's recording his father's testimonies. Vladik is a very old, an old man at this point. He's suffering, his health is suffering, he's got diabetes, he's got a heart condition. Art's a grown up, he's got a wife, and he's trying to, have a separate life, and he's not very close with his father. So we do see in the framing story their relationship and how that develops. The inset story is what takes place in Vladik's past. So the events where he and Anya meet when they fall in love, so their whole courtship, the birth of their son, Rishu, and all the events that play out from the time that they are in Poland to the time they're imprisoned in Auschwitz, and following events as well. So we do get sort of a layered narrative, the past and sort of the present, and how those two moments in time are very interrelated. So we have a framing story and an inset story. Those are just two helpful terms that can help you sort of see the connection between Vladik's past, and then his present relationships that are dysfunctional, to say the least. Some themes that are going to pop up. I'll just go through some of these briefly. Trauma and its after effects. So obviously this is a big one for somebody who experienced the Holocaust. Vladik will obviously experience what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later lecture. Art Spiegelman also suffers from certain feelings, traumatic feelings, just related to being the son of two survivors. So although he didn't even experience the event himself, he has a sort of second or intergenerational trauma. And then Anya as well will be shown to have psychological or emotional problems based on her experiences there as well. There'll be generational conflict between Art and his father. We see that, or at the beginning of the text, we learn that they are very estranged, emotionally kind of disconnected. And then we kind of do see how they kind of overcome some of their differences in personality and conflicts, and kind of reunite or grow closer as Art figures out why his father is the way that he is. Memory is another one. So we're dealing with testimonies and memories, and part of memory is the fact that for Vladik, the past is never in the past. His memories are still informing who he is or who he's become. Um, so for him, there's always this sense of things aren't stuck in the past; they're always still relevant and haunting him even. Race and ethnicity, as well as this idea of extermination, will play into our understanding of the animal allegory. And you'll soon discover that the animal groups are used very strategically by Art Spiegelman to depict ethnic groups. And then he'll add other layers to this allegory by using masks, animal masks, in place of the animal bodies or animal faces, as another level to this idea of one's ethnic identity or one's identity as it's perceived or stereotyped in society. And then survival is going to be another big theme. So what factors go into somebody's survival? Vladik is very resourceful, very quick-witted or quick thinking, and he has a real sort of presence of mind. He's very thrifty, and he's able to sort of predict or use his instinct to sort of suggest that, if he saves now, maybe it'll become useful later. He's also lucky in many ways, so we see how all these factors will, um, you know, um, factor into his survival of the Holocaust. For Anya, her survival depends on different factors. So obviously or we'll see that she's more dependent on Vladik to give her hope and a sense of purpose and to something to live for. But we see that she struggles more emotionally, a little bit more physically fragile than Vladik, who's very strong and robust in his youth. Lastly, there'll be the theme of representation and how Art Spiegelman is very, I guess you could call, self-reflexive in the way that he really shows us the process by which he turned his father's stories into a comic book. So he kind of um, refers to the process of how he goes about turning those memories into something that we're reading as his audience. So this process of representation is going to be also part of it. We'll see him talk about the very allegory that he uses, the animal allegory. We'll see that he struggles at certain points in the narrative with how he's going to convey the Holocaust in a meaningful way, in a way that doesn't trivialize the event, and he wants to do justice to the truth and not hide any of the flaws in the characters. So his father, he's going to represent his flaws and all, rather than just giving a glorified or glamorized or superficial portrayal. So all these things are going to be themes that will come up throughout our reading.